What happens when a seasoned journalist walks onto a morning talk show expecting a civil conversation, only to be blindsided by a host who's more interested in tearing him down than having a real discussion? In just 36 seconds, one comment from Lorraine Kelly would ignite a firestorm that would end with Piers Morgan storming off the set, leaving everyone in the studio absolutely speechless. This was supposed to be a routine interview. Piers Morgan, known for his no-nonsense approach to journalism and his willingness to ask the tough questions, had been invited onto Lorraine Kelly's popular morning show. The topic was meant to be straightforward, discussing his recent investigative work and his views on media integrity. Simple enough, right? But from the moment Piers settled into the guest chair, something felt off. Lorraine sat across from him, flanked by her regular panelists. To her left was Sarah Matthews, a lifestyle columnist who rarely missed an opportunity to pile on when the host started going after someone. To her right was David Chen, an entertainment reporter who usually played the role of backup, chiming in with supportive comments whenever Lorraine needed reinforcement. The studio audience was packed, cameras rolling, and the energy was already tense. "So Piers," Lorraine began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "thank you for joining us this morning. I have to say, I'm surprised you actually showed up." Piers raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by the opening jab. "Well, Lorraine, I was invited. I tend to honor my commitments, unlike some people in this industry," the audience murmured. Sarah Matthews leaned forward, a smirk playing on her lips. Lorraine's smile tightened. "Right. Well, let's talk about your recent work," Lorraine continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "You've been quite vocal about standards in journalism, haven't you? Quite the moral authority you've made yourself out to be." "I wouldn't say moral authority," Piers replied calmly. "I'd say I'm someone who believes journalists should ask real questions and hold people accountable. That's what we're supposed to do. Hold people accountable," Lorraine repeated, laughing. "That's rich coming from you. Tell me, Piers, when you're busy holding others accountable, who's holding you accountable for all the times you've been absolutely insufferable on television?" the audience gasped. David Chen nodded along, clearly enjoying where this was going. Piers shifted in his seat, maintaining his composure, but visibly surprised by the hostility. "I'm sorry, Lorraine, but I came here to have a conversation, not to be ambushed with personal attacks," Piers said, his voice steady. "If you have questions about my work, I'm happy to answer them. But this feels like something else entirely." "Oh, here we go," Sarah Matthews interjected, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Playing the victim card already? That was quick, even for you." Piers turned to face Sarah directly. "I'm not playing any card. I'm simply pointing out that there's a difference between a challenging interview and what's happening right now. Lorraine invited me here. I assumed it was for a professional discussion." Lorraine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Professional? You want to talk about professional? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on being controversial and difficult. Let's talk about how you've made a living out of being deliberately provocative and then acting shocked when people call you out on it." "I ask tough questions," Piers responded, his jaw tightening. "That's my job. If that makes me controversial, so be it. But at least I'm honest about what I'm doing. At least I don't pretend to be warm and friendly while I'm sharpening knives behind my back." "Excuse me?" Lorraine's voice rose sharply. "Are you suggesting that I'm being disingenuous?" "I'm suggesting that you invited me on your show under false pretenses," Piers said, his voice growing stronger. "You said you wanted to discuss journalism and media integrity. Instead, you're using this platform to take cheap shots. That's not journalism, Lorraine. That's a hit job." David Chen jumped in, clearly trying to back up his host. "I think what Lorraine is trying to say is that maybe, just maybe, you need to look in the mirror before you start lecturing everyone else about standards." "I'm not lecturing anyone," Piers shot back. "I'm defending myself against what is clearly a coordinated attack, 3 against 1. Very brave of all of you." The audience was completely silent now, everyone on the edge of their seats. The tension in the studio was palpable. Lorraine's face had turned red, and her friendly morning show demeanor had completely evaporated. "You know what your problem is, Piers?" Lorraine said, her voice cold. "You can dish it out, but you absolutely cannot take it. You spend your entire career grilling people, putting them on the spot, making them uncomfortable, but the second someone turns the tables on you, you fall apart." "I'm not falling apart," Piers said evenly. "I'm calling out bullying behavior when I see it. There's a difference between tough questioning and what you're doing right now." "Bullying?" Sarah Matthews laughed loudly. "Oh, That's precious. You, of all people, accusing someone else of bullying? The irony is just too much. Piers took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. Look, I've been in this business for a long time. I've been interviewed by some of the best and some of the worst. I can handle a difficult interview, but this isn't that. This is personal and it's unprofessional. Everything's personal with you, isn't it? Lorraine snapped. You make everything about you. This entire conversation, you've made it about how you're being treated unfairly, how you're being attacked. Did it ever occur to you that maybe people have legitimate criticisms of how you conduct yourself? Of course I have critics, Piers replied. Anyone who does anything meaningful has critics. But there's a way to address those criticisms that doesn't involve insulting your guest on live television. Insulting? Lorraine's voice was getting louder now. I haven't insulted you. I've asked you legitimate questions about your behavior and your career choices. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on the show. You haven't asked me a single legitimate question, Piers countered. You've made accusations and personal attacks. There's a difference. David Chin leaned forward again. I think you're being overly sensitive. Lorraine is just trying to have a frank conversation. If you can't handle frank conversations, maybe television isn't the right medium for you. Don't patronize me, David, Piers said sharply. I've been doing this since before you were probably out of school. I know what a frank conversation looks like, and this isn't it. The atmosphere was electric. The crew behind the cameras had stopped moving. Even the producers in the control room were watching in stunned silence. This had gone so far beyond a normal interview that no one quite knew how to handle it. Lorraine stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You want to know what this is really about, Piers? It's about the fact that you've spent years building yourself up as this great truth teller, this fearless journalist, when really you're just a man who enjoys making other people squirm. And now that you're in the hot seat, you can't handle it. That's not true, Piers said, also standing now. What I can't handle is being set up. You didn't bring me here for a conversation. You brought me here to humiliate me on camera. And I'm not going to sit here and let that happen. Oh, please, Sarah Matthews chimed in, still seated but clearly enjoying the spectacle. No one's humiliating you. You're humiliating yourself by acting like a child who can't take criticism. This isn't criticism, Piers said, his voice rising for the first time. Criticism would be pointing out specific things I've done and asking me to explain or defend them. What you three are doing is character assassination, plain and simple. Lorraine's eyes flashed with anger. Character assassination? You have got to be kidding me right now. You've made a career out of going after people, tearing them down on air, questioning their integrity, their intelligence, their motives. And now you're standing here crying foul because we're doing a fraction of what you do to others every single day. I asked people about their actions, their decisions, their public statements. Piers responded, his voice firm. I don't attack them personally. I don't ambush them. And I certainly don't gang up on them 3 against 1 like you're doing right now. Maybe people would gang up on you less if you weren't so impossible to deal with. David Chin said, his tone snide. Just a thought. Piers turned to face the cameras directly, ignoring David completely. This is what passes for journalism now? This is what morning television has become? A platform for hosts to settle personal scores and attack guests who dare to have opinions they don't like? Don't you dare lecture us about journalism, Lorraine hissed, stepping closer to him. You, who walked off your own show when someone disagreed with you. You, who's been fired from positions for behavior that crossed the line. You want to talk about professionalism? Let's talk about your track record. My track record speaks for itself, Piers said, his voice steady despite the clear anger in his eyes. I've broken major stories. I've held powerful people accountable. I've done the work. What have you done, Lorraine? Host a cozy morning chat show where you pretend to be everyone's friend while you sharpen your claws behind the scenes? The audience audibly gasped. Sarah. Matthews stood up now too, pointing at Piers. You don't get to come on here and insult Lorraine like that. This is her show. You're a guest. If you don't like how things are going, you know where the door is. Trust me, I'm well aware of where the door is, Piers said, his voice cold. And I'm about 2 seconds away from walking through it. Then walk, Lorraine said, her voice like ice. Go ahead. Run away like you always do when things get tough. Prove everyone right about you. This isn't about things getting tough, Piers said, unbuttoning his microphone. This is about refusing to participate in a circus. You want to have a real conversation? I'm here. You want to continue this farce? Count me out. Typical, David Chin said, shaking his head. Absolutely typical. Can't handle the heat, so he's leaving the kitchen. The heat? Piers laughed bitterly. This isn't heat, David. This is 3 people who decided before I even walked in here that they were going to make me look bad, and now you're upset that I'm not playing along. Lorraine crossed her arms, her expression hard. We didn't have to make you look bad, Piers. You're doing that all on your own by acting like this. Acting like what? Piers demanded. Defending myself? Refusing to be bullied? Sorry if that doesn't fit your narrative. There's that word again, Sarah Matthews said mockingly. Bullied. Poor Piers Morgan. Being bullied by morning television hosts? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound right now? I sound ridiculous? Piers turned to her, his patience clearly exhausted. You've contributed nothing to this conversation except snide remarks and personal attacks. You don't have an original thought in your head. You're just parroting whatever Lorraine says because you're too scared to think for yourself. How dare you? Sarah sputtered, her face turning red. You don't know anything about me. I know you're a sycophant, Piers said bluntly. I know you sit there and agree with everything your boss says because you're afraid of having your own opinion. That's not journalism. That's not even commentary. That's just sad. Lorraine slammed her hand on the desk. That's enough. You don't get to come on my show and insult my colleagues. You don't get to come here and act like you're better than everyone else. I never said I was better than anyone, Piers replied, his voice rising to match hers. But I'm certainly not worse, no matter how hard you're trying to paint me that way. We're not painting you any way, David interjected. We're just showing people who you really are. Who I really am? Piers laughed harshly. You don't know who I really am. None of you do. You've built up this caricature, this version of me that fits whatever point you're trying to make. And you're attacking that instead of dealing with the actual person standing in front of you. The actual person standing in front of us is someone who can't handle criticism, Lorraine said. The actual person is someone who dishes it out but can't take it. The actual person is someone who's so used to being in control that the moment he's not, he throws a tantrum. This isn't a tantrum, Piers said, his voice dangerously quiet now. This is me recognizing that I was brought here under false pretenses and deciding I'm not going to waste any more of my time. False pretenses, Sarah repeated mockingly. Everything's a conspiracy with you, isn't it? Everything's everyone else's fault. You never take responsibility for anything. I take responsibility for my actions, Piers said firmly. I take responsibility for my words. I take responsibility for my career. But I will not take responsibility for your behavior, or Lorraine's, or David's. That's on you. Lorraine stepped even closer, her voice low and intense. You know what I think, Piers? I think you're scared. I think you're scared that people are finally seeing through you. I think you're scared that your act is getting old and people are tired of it. And I think that's why you're reacting like this. You don't know what you're talking about, Piers said, but there was something in his voice now. Something that suggested Lorraine had struck a nerve. Don't I? Lorraine pressed on. You've been doing the same thing for years. The same provocations, the same controversies, the same pattern. And it's worked for you. But maybe, just maybe, people are starting to see that there's no substance behind all the noise. Maybe that's what's really bothering you. What's bothering me, Piers said, his voice hard, is being ambushed by someone who pretends to be a friend to everyone but is really just as cutthroat as anyone else in this business. At least I'm honest about what I am. You hide behind this warm, friendly persona, but underneath it, you're just as willing to go for the jugular as anyone. At least I don't make a career out of it, Lorraine shot back. At least I don't. Build my entire brand around being difficult and controversial. No, you just do it when it suits you, Piers replied. When you can get away with it, when you think no one will call you out on it, well, I'm calling you out on it right now. This is unprofessional. This is beneath you. Or at least, it should be. David stood up now, clearly trying to play peacemaker but doing a poor job of it. Look, maybe we all need to take a breath here. This has gotten way out of hand. It got out of hand the moment I sat down, Piers said, looking at David. This was never meant to be a fair interview. This was an ambush, pure and simple. Stop saying that, Lorraine snapped. It wasn't an ambush. We had legitimate questions for you. Then ask them, Piers challenged. Ask me a legitimate question right now, not an attack disguised as a question, not a personal insult. A real, honest question about my work or my views. The studio fell silent. Lorraine stared at Piers, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find words. Sarah and David exchanged glances. The audience held their breath. Finally, Lorraine spoke, her voice tight. Fine, here's a question. Do you think your approach to journalism helps or hurts public discourse? That's actually a good question, Piers said, sounding almost surprised. And I'll answer it honestly. I think my approach challenges people. I think it makes people uncomfortable sometimes. But I also think that's necessary. Too much of journalism has become soft, too afraid of offending anyone, too concerned with being liked. Sometimes you have to ask the hard questions, even if it makes you unpopular. And you don't think there's a line? Lorraine asked. You don't think there's a point where being challenging crosses over into being cruel? Of course, there's a line, Piers replied, and I try not to cross it. But I'll be honest, I'm not always successful. I'm human. I make mistakes. But the difference is, I'm trying to get at truth. I'm trying to hold people accountable. What happened here today wasn't about that. This was personal. Maybe it was personal, Lorraine admitted, her voice softer now but still edged with anger. Maybe I do have issues with how you conduct yourself. Maybe I think you cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. Is that so wrong? It's not wrong to have those opinions, Piers said, but it is wrong to invite someone on your show under false pretenses and then gang up on them. If you wanted to have a debate about my methods, we could have had that, but that's not what this was. Sarah Matthews, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly spoke up again. Oh, come on. You're still playing the victim. We asked you tough questions. Isn't that what you do to everyone else? There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks, Piers repeated, his frustration evident. How many times do I have to say that? Maybe the reason you keep having to say it is because it's not true, David suggested. Maybe what you're calling personal attacks are just legitimate criticisms that you don't want to hear. I'm fine with criticism, Piers insisted. What I'm not fine with is three people teaming up to tear me down on live television while pretending it's journalism. Lorraine's patience seemed to finally snap completely. You know what, Piers? I'm done with this. I'm done with your victim complex. I'm done with your self-righteousness. I'm done with your constant need to be the center of attention. If you want to leave, then leave. If you want to stay, then sit down and have an actual conversation like an adult. An actual conversation, Piers repeated slowly. That's interesting coming from you, considering you haven't let me finish a single thought without interrupting me or insulting me since I sat down. Because every thought you have is about how wronged you are, Lorraine said, her voice rising again. Every single thing that comes out of your mouth is about how unfair we're being to you, how we're ganging up on you, how we're attacking you. You haven't once stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, we have valid points. I would consider your points if you made any, Piers countered. But all you've done is attack my character and question my motives. You haven't made a single substantive criticism of my work. Your work? Sarah laughed. Your work is your character. The way you treat people, the way you conduct interviews, the way you behave on air, that is your work. And we're saying it's not good enough. Well, fortunately for me, I don't answer to you, Piers said coldly. I answer to my audience, and they seem to disagree with your assessment. Your audience? David scoffed. You mean the people who enjoy watching you tear others down? That's who you're proud of appealing to? I'm proud of appealing to people who appreciate honesty, Piers said. People who are tired of being fed, sanitized, approved, safe content that doesn't challenge anyone or anything. There's that word again, Lorraine said. Challenge. You keep using it like it justifies everything you do. But challenging people doesn't mean being cruel to them. It doesn't mean humiliating them. It doesn't mean making them feel small. I don't try to make anyone feel small, Piers said, and for the first time, there was something almost vulnerable in his voice. I try to get answers. I try to get truth. If people feel uncomfortable in that process, I'm sorry, but that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is doing my job. And our job is to hold you accountable, Lorraine said, just like you hold others accountable. Why is that so hard for you to accept? Because you're not holding me accountable, Piers said, his voice rising again. You're attacking me. There's a difference, and you know it. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Everyone could feel it. The audience sat frozen, afraid to, even breathe too loudly. The crew had long since given up on trying to signal anyone or control the situation. This had taken on a life of its own. I'm going to ask you one more time, Lorraine said, her voice steady but filled with barely controlled anger. Are you going to sit down and have this conversation properly, or are you going to continue acting like a child? Acting like a child, Piers repeated, shaking his head. That's your problem right there, Lorraine. You can't resist getting in one more dig, one more insult, one more condescending remark. Even when you're supposedly trying to move forward, you can't help yourself. Because you're impossible, Lorraine snapped. You're absolutely impossible to have a rational conversation with. I'm impossible? Piers's voice was incredulous now. I've been trying to have a rational conversation since I got here. You're the one who's been hurling insults. We're going in circles, David said, sounding exasperated. This is getting us nowhere. Finally, something we can agree on, Piers said. He reached for his microphone pack again, this time fully removing it. I think we're done here. You're really going to do this? Sarah asked, her voice mocking. You're really going to storm off the set like a diva? I'm not storming off like a diva, Piers said calmly, though his jaw was tight. I'm making a professional decision not to participate in what has clearly become a personal attack disguised as an interview. Call it whatever you want, Lorraine said, her arms crossed. But everyone watching knows what this really is. This is you running away because you can't handle being questioned. Think whatever you want, Lorraine, Piers said, handing his microphone to a nearby crew member. I know what happened here today. You know what happened here today. And everyone watching knows what happened here today. You invited me here to embarrass me, and when I didn't play along, you got angry. That's the truth of it. The truth, Lorraine laughed bitterly. You wouldn't know the truth if it hit you in the face. And you wouldn't recognize fair journalism if your career depended on it, Piers shot back. Which, given this performance, it probably should. That was apparently the final straw for Lorraine. Her face went pale, then flushed red. Get out, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Get off my show. Get out of my studio. Now, happily, Piers said. He looked directly at the camera one more time. To everyone watching, I apologize that you didn't get to see the interview we were supposed to have. I came here in good faith to have a conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what the host had in mind. How dare you, Lorraine said, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you stand there and play the victim after everything? But Piers was already walking away. He moved toward the exit, his posture straight, his head held high. Behind him, chaos erupted on the set. Lorraine was shouting something. Sarah was talking over her. David was trying to calm everyone down, and the audience didn't know whether to clap or gasp or stay silent. Piers reached the studio door and paused for just a moment. He looked back at the set, at Lorraine still standing there fuming, at Sarah and David looking uncomfortable now that their target was leaving, at the camera still rolling, capturing every second of the disaster. This is what morning television has become, he said, his voice carrying across the studio, and people wonder why no one trusts the media anymore. Then he pushed through the door and was gone. The studio fell into shocked silence. Lorraine stood frozen, her chest heaving, clearly trying to process what had just happened. Sarah and David exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of their control. The audience sat in stunned disbelief, unsure of what they had just witnessed. A producer's voice could be heard frantically talking in Lorraine's earpiece, but she didn't seem to hear it. She just stood there, staring at the door Piers had walked through, her carefully constructed morning show persona shattered completely. Well, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, I suppose that's that. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every awkward second that followed. Sarah tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, but it fell flat. David attempted to steer things back to the show's regular programming, but no one was listening. The audience remained silent, processing what they had seen. In those final moments before the show cut to commercial, Lorraine looked directly at the camera. Her expression was difficult to read, a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something else. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just shock at how badly things had gone. The red light on the camera blinked off, and suddenly the studio erupted in activity. Producers rushed onto the set. Crew members started moving equipment. The audience began talking among themselves, their voices rising in excited, confused chatter. But none of it mattered. The damage was done. In 36 seconds, everything had fallen apart, and there was no taking it back.